Talk is about Guerrilla Accessibility. Accessibility is making your site and your content available to everybody. So, a lot of times we forget who everybody is. So we'll go over that a little bit. And the reason it's Guerrilla Accessibility, you need two things. You need an ideology and you need guerrillas. Anytime you have a mass movement, anytime you have a project that requires changing hearts and minds, you need a manifesto. You need resistance fighters. You need guerrillas. We're going to get to that, more on that a little bit later. A little bit about me. My name is Kevin Lanahan. I work for the Missouri Department of Conservation. Been working for the state of Missouri since 1996. I love standards. That's mostly because I lack a lot of creative imagination and I like to have boxes to work within. Here's you have a screen. What are you going to put on the screen? How are you going to display it? But I know it's got to be on that screen. I love that. I have friends and family who are blind, deaf, autistic, colorblind, paralyzed. So all of these people I've grown up with, or I've married into a family, and they all have different needs. But you know what? They're all just people. It's not really complicated. It's like, they need to do the same things we're doing on the web. So I can also talk about bicycles and bourbon, but that'll be later. Quick survey, and I've lost my notes. Here we go. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Who's heard of Section 508 or WCAG, WCAG? A few people. Okay. Who follows them or builds it into their workflow? Thank you. Yay. Okay. Now, who thinks accessibility is something you only have to worry about if you're in government? There's a lot of folks like that. And previous times I've given this talk, it's been more for a government audience. So I've tailored it a little bit, but if it seems a little awkward some ways, it's because I'm not sure who all I'm talking to here. Anybody think that accessibility in Drupal is someone else's job, kind of like Drupal security? Oh yeah, someone else does that, right? Yeah. No, we all know this is all part of what we should be doing. Big thing is we don't know how. So I want to help teach you a little bit how. So first of all, everybody has a disability, or they will. It could be a temporary disability, could be permanent, could be physical, could be perceptual. Folks with dyslexia, it's like, okay, they move around, do everything, but boy, they might have trouble reading some of the text on a page. Guess what? We can fix that a little bit by adjusting. We can choose a different font. Lots of little things like that. In Missouri, we've got 155,000 blind Missourians. 81% of those are 35 or older. 100,000 Missourians are deaf or hard of hearing. And in 2013, 800,000 people classified themselves as disabled, either with a visual, hearing, ambulatory, or cognitive disability. So that's kind of a self-described, they say they're disabled. 34% of them are working. Now, I don't have a breakdown as to how many between the ages of, say, 35 and 60 are working. Because a lot of these folks are older, retired, think your parents, your grandparents, me, stuff like that. But there's a huge number of just Missourians there. If you work for a shop and you're working for, you have clients that are trying to reach the public, these are all people that buy things. These are all folks that need the information that you've got. So, your site needs to be accessible. It just does. But it's hard. I'm not sure how. My boss won't let me. These are all things I heard at DrupalCon when we were discussing accessibility. And a lot of them were government people. It's like, yeah, my boss doesn't build it into the timeline. It's like, doesn't matter. You just do it. Yeah, my developers don't understand. That was another good one. It's like, well, great, you know, training with it's not hard. The good one, it limits my design decisions. Yeah, it's like, oh, you know, but my, you know, artistic integrity and my incredible design. All that accessibility does with design decisions is get rid of bad ones. It gets rid of ones that you don't, yeah, that limit people's ability to see your stuff. So, yeah, you know, it needs to be accessible. These are all just perceptual concepts to overcome. So, how accessible do I need to be? Back-end Drupal 7, a whole lot better than Drupal 6. Largely accessible, does pretty good. Drupal 8, a whole lot better. It's really built a whole lot of just basic accessibility goodness in there. So the secret, if you're using Drupal 7 or 8, is don't screw it up. So, you know, that's great. They've done half the job for you. Next part, is my custom code accessible? Oh, you know, there's all sorts of ways that you can mess up custom code. Okay, well, you know, guess what? There's a few simple things you can do to make it better. Is your display accessible? You know, what colors did you pick? What fonts did you pick? What's your color contrast? We'll get into that a whole lot later. Is my content accessible? Have you written it to a level that your audience is going to understand? I work for the Missouri Department of Conservation. And so we're Fish, Forest, and Wildlife. If you ever bought a fishing or hunting permit, that went through us. We do programs everywhere for all sorts of people. And we're for everyone. We also are staffed by a bunch of biologists and a bunch of bureaucrats. If you talk to scientists, they speak in science. You know, it's like talking to academics. They have an academic language that they use that doesn't translate well to regular people. So, you know, getting your content accessible so it's understood by people that you need to reach is another part of accessibility. So, our ideology for accessibility is, this is for everybody. We know about accessibility, we believe in it, we know it makes the internet better, we think everyone should do it, we need to change hearts and minds. We need to get people to understand that this is just part of what we do as Drupal developers. And as an aside, I don't consider myself a Drupal developer. I'm really more of a site builder and content person. I have an almost pathological aversion to coding, but I do it when I have to. And when you do, it's like, oh, you know, these things, once you bake them into your mindset, really easy to do. Little big secret, which isn't a secret, if you adopt standards-based HTML output, this gets so much easier. You know, all that stuff that they're standards, we never know what they are, we don't understand what they mean. If we start finding out what they mean, everything becomes easier. So, this is for everybody. This is a line from the UK government website, their design principles. And they have a list of, 8 design principles. And this is the one that covers accessibility. Doesn't say anything about being disabled, doesn't say anything about being blind or having a mobility problem. It just says it's for everybody. You have to reach everybody. It's good design. So everything we build should be as inclusive, legible, and readable as possible. If we have to sacrifice elegance, so be it. We're building for needs. This also gets into the whole, you know, who are you designing for? You know, you should be designing for a user, having a user story, and making sure that you're hitting all those needs. So, changing hearts and minds is hard. So we're going to talk about that later. But there are some things we can do if we're gorillas. So, you know, a gorilla's dictionary definition is a member of a small independent group taking part in irregular fighting, or as an adjective, activities performed in an impromptu way, often without authorization. So I work for the government. I'm responsible. I have a legal requirement to follow Section 508 requirements. I've yet to work for a boss that, when we do a project, has included accessibility reviews and a timeline. And it's not because they think it's just assumed that it's going to happen. It's just they don't necessarily think about it. So I'm not going to count on any future bosses or any of your bosses or even any of you to necessarily think about this. Well, hopefully you will, because you're here. But you become guerrillas. You can be a ninja, you can be a wizard, a mage, whatever it is, whatever works for you. But the idea is that you can make this stuff happen, and it's not that hard. So, 508 WCAG 2.0 AA. 5.8 is a standard. It's been around since, 1999 or something. It's been around forever. Outdated. We're getting about this close. We're so close to actually having it formally changed to adopt the WCAG standards, which are more global and will get us a lot more oomph. Usual reasons, right thing to do. One thing, it actually increases your search engine optimization. Part of the way it does this is if you're writing accessible code, you're writing valid code. If you're writing valid code, your search engines know what they're looking at. They know that if you have a picture, they know that it's what it's a picture of because you've put alt text in there. So now, here's another thing. If you do any contracting with the government, with the feds, with the state of Missouri, you need to provide accessible content, accessible output. It's starting to get written into contracts more. As it is, it's been a law since 2000 in Missouri. But again, it's something that doesn't get followed all the time. So, if you're starting a project and you're working on accessibility, use the WCAG 2.0 standards. So, how do we do this? An acronym that WCAG uses, WCAG, some people call it WCAG, I think just WCAG is good, is POUR. POUR stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And so this is kind of the spectrum of things that you want to think about when you're building accessibility into your site. So, perceivable. A few things, I just kind of picked the highlights. There's a lot more here. Accessibility is one of those things that you can go really far down a rabbit hole. How do you design for someone who is deaf, blind, and doesn't have any feeling in their hands? It's like, some people you're going to have trouble communicating with. But for most of the visually disabled, hearing impaired, mobility impaired folks, these things are going to get you 90-95% accessible. First thing, alt text for all images. If you have a picture of something, have a description of what that picture is. It's not that hard. It's like a tweet. I mean, it shouldn't be any longer than a tweet. Here for us, since we do a lot of nature stuff, it could be, it's a monarch butterfly on a milkweed in a field, as simple as that. If it's describing, say, a bullfrog, you may want to get into more description of, what are we seeing in this bullfrog? You see its ear, the ears, or you see, the skin is mottled or whatever. You can get a lot of detail in there, but you don't want too much because, again, should be like a tweet. Semantic markup. This is a big one, and Drupal is kind of guilty of this in a lot of cases. It's real easy to plug in a module and have it display some content, and that content's just wrapped in a div tag. Well, a div tag doesn't mean anything. It's just a placeholder. What you need to do is make sure things are wrapped up in a heading tag, an H1, H2, H3, and that those are hierarchically situated. So you don't have an H2 that contains an H1. No, it can only contain an H3. Again, this is basic HTML. It's the stuff that hopefully you learn way back when. But making sure everything is in some kind of meaningful tag, because a screen reader or Google will understand that, this is content. This is something that it can parse out and it can search on. So put it in a meaningful tag. If it's a list, put it in an LI tag. Here's a good one. Labels for form elements. So I was talking with Brian, who's sitting up in the audience today, trying to register for this, and he has a visual disability. There were no labels on the registration form. So he had to kind of fumble around to try to figure out what field he was filling in. This happens a lot. Drupal wants you to have labels. It makes it kind of easy. You have to work a little harder to not put labels on your fields when you're doing content types. But if you're creating a field or creating a form, you just need to make sure that you're getting some kind of label in there. So, for instance, if we're asking for a first name, there should be a label that says first name, and it's associated with that element. This is not a special accessibility thing. This is in the HTML standard. This is how it's supposed to work. So just do that. It makes it easier, because we run on forms, whether we're selling something, whether we're getting information. We have a lot of forms online. Make sure that search button, that search field, has a label. You don't even have to display it, but you have a label that says search. So somebody knows, this is a search box. Otherwise they have to guess, gee, it's at the top of the page. Maybe it's a search box. I wonder what happens if I put something in. No, just tell them. Make it easy. Tables. Tables are for data. Back in the bad old days, we used tables for design, and thank God we don't do that. But every now and then, you'll have some kind of display where you'll need 2 columns. And instead of doing CSS, it's like, I can just throw a table in there. Don't do that. Tables are for data. And then if you have a table, make sure you have table headers. Guess what? This isn't special accessibility stuff either. This is HTML. Just follow the standard. So now the next one, color contrast. This is something that you do once in your design stage, really. Make sure that you have a 4.5 to 1 color contrast ratio. What that means is there's going to be sufficient contrast between your text and your background for most everybody to see it. This is where designers kind of get upset because, I picked this color and now you're messing with my design. It's like, no, if we just move that just a couple of notches down, it's imperceptible to 99% of people. You don't see that color variation, but it provides enough contrast that text isn't going to get lost. And I'll show you an example later on our site because we've got stories. No pictures of text. Here's another good one. If you've got an image, has anyone ever scanned a page and made it a PDF and sent it to someone? It's like, okay, guess what? If someone with a visual disability tries to read that, or if you post that online, it's just going to say, yeah, it's a PDF, but there's nothing on it. Same thing with a picture of text. You have a whole bunch of text that you've laid out in Photoshop and you've made this great image and you put it on your site. There's no way for a computer to read that text because it's not text. Images, use them for images. If you have to have some text in there, make sure that it's explained in the alt text or in a caption or somewhere so that screen readers can get the content that you've worked on. Last thing, video. If you're doing a lot of video, make sure you do closed captions. This is not trivial, although it's a little bit easier with YouTube. You can tell it to try to auto-caption. It'll do a horrible job, but you can go in and correct it, and so your text will line up with the things that are going on screen, and you'll have closed captioning. I'm still waiting for YouTube to come up with a good way to do audio descriptive services, so you could actually hear what's going on if you have a disability, if you have a visual disability, but who knows when that'll happen. But in short, this isn't hard. I mean, this is HTML. This is the stuff that before you knew about WordPress and Drupal, when you were coding sites by hand, this is the stuff you should have been doing. This gets you 90% accessible on your sites, on your pages. So, next one, operable. Few simple things. Can you navigate by keyboard? This is easy to test. Put your mouse away. Start tabbing. Can you get through the page? Can you see what's going on? Make sure there's no keyboard traps. This is a wonderful thing when you have forms. And a lot of shopping carts seem to have a problem with this. You can go shopping, and I don't know if this has been resolved yet or not, but Target, for a long time, you could go through their catalog, you could put things in your shopping cart, you're ready to buy, and you go to checkout, and you can't find the submit button. There's no way to complete your transaction. They had a keyboard trap in there. It was just sloppy coding, and they didn't test it by tabbing through to see, does this work? So, this one is really easy to do. Unplug your mouse, or just hide it, turn it off, however it works. Cover up your touchpad, and just use the tab key and the arrow keys to see if you can get around. So, no content flashes. Thank God we don't have to blink tag anymore. But if it flashes more than 3 times a second, that can trigger some epileptic issues. We don't want that. Skip nav links. If you have a person using a screen reader, they have to listen to everything on your page. Mm-hmm. Well, especially if you have a mega menu or something up at the top with about 100 links in it, don't make them have to listen to that every time. Nice thing is, Drupal makes it easy to do that, to provide that skip nav link. So use that. Contextual links. When you have a link, don't say click here, don't say read more. Now, there's tricks around that, especially in Drupal. You can write a little bit of code that will display the text, read more, but will, for a screen reader, read out, go to this page, and send them to another page. You can do a lot of stuff like that. But if you just make the link meaningful, guess what? You've made your site more accessible. Other thing is meaningful headings. Make sure you use H1s, H2s, H3s. H1s are your page title. It's the most important thing. You got a subsection under that, it's an H2. Again, it's an outline. It's like 3rd grade when we started learning how language worked, how to write a report. Third thing, understandable. Is your site understandable? Do you have a language identifier in there? Do you know it's English? If you're here in St. Louis, if you have a site, if you have pages that you've translated into Bosnian, do you have something to say, oh, read this like a Bosnian, in Bosnian, or French, or Spanish, or any other language? Nice thing is you can put this anywhere on a site, so if you use a little French phrase somewhere, you can say, oh, language equals French. Boom, screen reader will read that out in French as opposed to English. Readability level. This gets back to, oh, I work with a bunch of scientists. Great. Let's talk about mortality rates. How about if we talk about how many deer died from something? Use language that people understand. Oh, here's a harvest report. It's like, no, hunters killed this many deer last year. Don't use euphemisms. Make it simple language. The nice thing is, if you create your content in Word, there's tools in Word that'll tell you what your reading level is. It's like, okay, so that's kind of easy. Predictable behavior just means your site works the same throughout. Isn't that why we have a content management system, so we don't have unexpected results? We don't have different navigation on different pages. We have consistency. So again, Drupal helps you there. Just don't mess it up. Error identification or form validation. Make sure it's meaningful. If there's something wrong, don't just have something in red pop up. Somebody that's colorblind probably isn't going to notice that. You know, move the focus somewhere or make it easily navigable to find the errors. Fourth item of poor, robust. Really, it's about just writing valid code, because when you write valid code, your code is future-proof. Now, I'm talking about just output, the stuff that comes out on a browser, on a mobile phone, whatever. If you write valid code, you're going to be mostly accessible. So, one of the things, there's tools to test this. One of my favorites is the Wave Toolbar. This is for Chrome. It's produced by, I can't remember their names now, the guys out in Utah, Jared Smith and his group. And it's a wonderful tool because you can just click on a button, and I've got it up in my toolbar there right next to my little Evernote elephant that I need to get rid of. You click on that, and it gives you a nice little report here of, oh, here's your page. It'll overlay some things on here. Now, our site, you would think government, here's this guy giving a talk on accessibility. This should be awesome, right? Yeah, not so much. We got things accessible. We're doing some other additional repairs before we launched, and somehow we think that one of our contractors didn't update his code from Git before he pushed this code, overwrote a whole bunch of our accessibility changes. So now we've already lost those contractors, their contract expired. We're trying to play catch up and get this up again. But we have a nice report on the left side of the page, errors. Hey, I have 25 images that don't have alt text. Whoops. Now, part of this is because of the way things got imported. There were some things maybe that got imported without. Some of it was maybe test data that never got quite removed, or it was entered before we made sure alt text was turned on. Alt text should always be turned on. If you have a media type, it's one of the things Drupal, again, makes it easy to make sure you have alt text. Multiple form labels, empty headings, so we've got some problems with our nested headings. The nice thing is this lays it out really easily for us. In some of our examples, you can see we have a little finger, means it's a link, and it says ×2. It means we have multiple links to the same content. And it's because instead of wrapping the image and the title into one link, they're separated out and each one has a separate link. This isn't necessarily a big thing, but if you have to listen to link, image, picture of largemouth bass, and then link to whatever, and then read the latest fishing report. It's like after a while, you don't want to hear that over and over again. So again, make your code nice and tight. So yeah, we are far from perfect and have not eaten all of our own dog food yet. So we are getting there. So there's a couple of things you can do when you're designing a site. When you do a wireframe, and the previous Simon was showing some examples of just sketches on a napkin, basically, of possible layouts and sitemap. Hey, guess what? Go ahead and put tags on there. This should be a paragraph. This should be a heading 1. This should be a heading 2. and give that to the folks that are actually implementing your code so that they're reminded, yeah, this stuff has to be wrapped in some kind of code. Check your color contrast. This is when you want to do it, while you're designing. Oh, is that blue just a little bit off? Is it too hard to read against that light blue background? Now's the time to fix it. Guess what? You can make that change just by, we've got some tools, and I'll show them to you in a bit, that make it real easy to test that. And when you go to make those changes, the number, your color and your CSS changes, you don't really notice a change. Review the site. If you've got a dev site, you should have a dev site. Make sure everything's working in there before you push things up. Don't wait until you're in test mode necessarily to find it. Again, this is real life experience. Sometimes we got ahead of ourselves. Build accessibility reviews into the timeline. These don't have to be big accessibility, oh, we're going to spend, an hour or 2 hour meeting and we're going to get everybody together. This is just somebody going in and saying, hey, when I tab through here, I don't see that particular element. I don't get to the submit button. I don't get to the cancel button. There's something wrong. Or I bounce from the top of the page to the bottom of the page and back to the top of the page. There's something wrong with our tab order here. Fix it. That's the best time to do it. So, simple tests, keyboard tests, stuff like that, using simple tools like Web Developer Toolbar and things like that. You can check check for HTML validation. Do this while you're in dev. Use the Wave Toolbar. Wave Toolbar is awesome. There's another site called Tangaru, Tangaru.com. I think it's a New Zealand or Australian site that does a really good job with color contrast and giving you some, and I'll see if I can pop that up. Navigate by keyboard. Again, test, 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 navigate, navigate. So, other things you can do as you're building out a site, make sure your content contributors don't have an opportunity to mess this up. So you can program most of this in. Your titles of your pages are always going to be an H1. So when you get over into the CK editor thing, don't give them an option to put an H1 in there. You already got an H1 in there. Limit their options, and you can limit it as tight as needs to be, or as tight as you can trust your staff or your client to make a decent site. At the simplest level, hey, let's paste from Word, let's add bold and italic, and if we can get rid of underline, let's go ahead and do that, because really if it's not a link, it shouldn't be underlined. And then let's give them an opportunity to put a link. As opposed to kind of the default, which gives you all sorts of ways to mess up your page and make it less accessible. So it's like, just don't do that. Now, there's also a module called Paragraphs that can help with this. It does some interesting things. I haven't played with that much, but we're about to do a DCAN site, and I think we may be able to build that into there. Another idea is you're designing your site, chunk your content. So we have a field guide, and it lists about 1,600 Missouri native plants and animals, and tells you about their characteristics, their habitat, their range, their diet, their reproductive cycle. All of that's highly predictable. All of that is highly standardized. So instead of having a big body text, a big body block that someone would have to remember to fill this in, we've given them nice little fields over here. So habitat and conservation, which corresponds directly to a section on the page. They don't get any editing options. They can't do underline or anything like that because they don't need to, although we could give them a limited CK editor capability there. But chunking that content up into tiny little bits gives you as a designer or a developer control over how that heading structure is organized and how many ways a user can ultimately mess this up. So, let's see. Let me get my cursor back. There we go. So, next thing, I mean, if you want to continue with this, one of the things you need to do is you need to start making sure your staff, your employees, your clients are trained. To do that, you need to document, and just like Simon said before, or I'm sorry, Larry was saying, document, document, document. You can start with documentation and build from there. Document the coding standards. Say, hey, we are going to do things this way. We are always going to have a paragraph tag somewhere. If we have a naked div tag, we're going to put a paragraph tag in there somewhere so that thing lives in something. You train your users, train your developers, you train them again, and then when they all leave and go to the next company, you got a new batch, you get to go train it again. So you get to be a trainer. It never ends, but each time you get better. So, talked about ideology, we talked about some of the things you need to do. Changing hearts and minds. So, this is something we did a few years ago, and we're still doing. We're kind of starting it up again after a big redesign. And that's an empathy initiative. What we did was brought in a accessible technology user. And she was blind, used a screen reader. We were having trouble getting our designers and our editors to understand why this was important. They just thought it was something the web guys did. It's like, yeah, no, we have too much stuff. We need to back that up and get that in really at our field level, getting them to think like this. So we brought somebody in, showed them how AT works. We used examples from our agency so they would be relevant to people. So here's a PDF, because we're government, we love PDFs. Here's Word documents, because everybody uses Word. By bringing someone in, we also put a face on accessibility. So when we talk about accessibility as a concept, it's like talking about security. It's like, I don't know what a Russian hacker looks like. I don't know why he wants my stuff. It's hard for me I understand I need to do it. I haven't internalized it, but again, I do mostly site building, so I'm not actually developing stuff. Putting a face on it, finding, that person that can say, here's why you want to do this, is important, and it's very powerful. So what we did was we brought in Gretchen. Gretchen was a college student, was a gamer, early adopter on social media, and then as a fourth-year sophomore, began to lose her sight very suddenly over the course of a couple of months. So she's an activist, she's always super busy, and then boom, her life got put on hold for about a year. So I met her at a conference that Missouri Assistive Technology, which is part of the Department of Education, elementary and secondary education in the state, puts on every year. It's called Power Up. A lot of it is school-oriented, but they have people from all walks of life that use assistive technology, whether it is a lift to get them in their van, whether it is a kind of a camera that looks on the screen and enlarges the text enough so they can see it or see parts of it with whatever visual disability they have. Special keyboards for people with mobility problems. Anyway, so I met her there, and she's an attractive young brunette. So it's like, oh, she will be perfect to come talk to our staff. She's currently working for a public interest group, which means I have to find a new contractor. And hopefully we'll get one of those picked up soon. But what we did was we started doing presentations first to our designers and our editors. Then we started working out to our content contributors, the people that were giving us a lot of content to put online. Our workflow, we make everything kind of come through, our web team of about 3 people initially to set up a page, because we want to make sure we get all the meta tags and all that stuff right. After that, they can edit it as however they want. We did a 3-part presentation. We showed how a blind person uses a computer and uses a browser. And if you've ever heard someone use a screen reader, and if you've got an Apple, you can turn on VoiceOver and kind of get a feel for this. The most commonly used one is JAWS. As people get trained to use this, just like you could become a speed reader and go through a book, read a page a second, they can listen at like 600 words a minute. Here's what it sounds like. And people, their jaws drop. How does anyone do? Oh my God, what are we doing? And then they slow it down so you can actually hear. And yes, all the words are there, and they have nice ways to navigate. Like you can go through and just navigate through headings to find the sections you need, or you can look just for the links, and all sorts of tools to make that makes it easier for them to view the site. So again, we don't have to do anything special other than write valid code. How cool is that? Their tools do the rest. So as we were trying to get our content contributors and designers kind of on board with this, we tried to tell them, we need to change workflows. We have designers that were literally cutting and pasting, when they started their careers and are now using InDesign. Trying to get them to adopt a new workflow isn't going to work. But when we showed them why they wanted to do that, all of a sudden they caught on. We adapted these programs to an audience. So Gretchen, I don't think she knows. She's got a Star Trek uniform on. I don't know that she knows it's a red Star Trek uniform. Meanwhile, our guide dog has blue uniform on. So yeah, she doesn't know she's doomed, but she's got total nerd credentials. We would tailor this to the audience. And so if we were talking mostly to content contributors, we would deal mostly with Word and the web. If we were talking to developers or app developers, we do things like plug in her iPhone. Girl can't live without her iPhone. I mean, it tells her everything, because an iPhone is pretty much accessible out of the box. Although you may need someone to actually turn on the part that makes it accessible initially. After that, boy, yeah, you can do everything you can do, as a sighted user, where you just go and tap. It's like, yeah, you know where your buttons are. You hover over, it'll tell you what the button is. You press it, and off you go. It's at the point now where if we're going out and doing a presentation, I make her navigate, so I don't have to keep my eye on my GPS. She just listens to her phone and tells me, oh, you got to turn up at a mile. So, it's kind of cool. And again, all these tools are there. We just have to make sure that we don't break them. So, the other part of this thing, we make sure we use relevant examples for this, and demonstrate a screen reader. We had a PDF newsletter. We would show them, here's a scanned PDF which has no content, very bad. Here's one that has been created in InDesign but wasn't really optimized. And then here's one after we went in and remediated a PDF. We showed them how to use Word a little bit differently so that they could see their screen, their content, kind of in an outline form. Make sure they have headings. If you're using Word on Windows, under File and prepare for publication or whatever, there's a button to check for accessibility, and it'll tell you, hey, you don't have a lot of headings in this. Maybe you should put some headings in there, or you might want to check and make sure your table reads correctly. Doing that, if you export that, you can export it into InDesign, you can export it into a web page. Guess what? Boom, all of your tagging, your code is consistent, and you don't lose anything. So it's very, very slick. Nobody knows about it. So, some resources, and this is already online, so you can pick these up, but it didn't provide links because it's easier just to search. Chrome HTML Validator is just an extension. There's also one for Firefox. You can go click on the little icon in your toolbar, and it'll run a validation test. Do you have valid HTML? If you have valid HTML, yay! Like I said, you're probably, you're getting close to 90% accessible. Web Developer Toolbar, Firefox, Chris Peterick, it's been around forever. It's also available as a port for Chrome. Has a whole bunch of tools that can help you as you're looking at your completed web page. It will, you can put boxes around table elements, headings. You can identify those so you can see where they are. You can see where things are missing or where they're improperly nested. Color contrast. Here we go. Contrastfinder.10aguru.com. Really good one. Accessibility, Wave Toolbar for Chrome. There's lots of other tools out there. These are just some of the ones that I find most helpful. Takeaway for this whole thing, make valid HTML code. Use alt text for your images. Put labels on your forms. And check your color contrast. Just, if you can't do anything else, do those 4 things, and you're going to be mostly accessible. You're going to have a great start. So, we're pretty much out of time. I'm 2 minutes over, but if there's any questions, we can do that after. We can do it during lunch, but I'll let you go grab sandwiches before they're gone. So, thank you.